Lieutenant Jake Morrison had always believed that the most dangerous part of reconnaissance missions was the possibility of encountering hostile aliens, but as his shuttle disintegrated around him in Nick 7's electromagnetic tempest, he realized that sometimes the planet itself was the deadliest enemy. Warning systems screamed alerts he couldn't hear over the sound of crystalline wind particles shredding his hull like cosmic sandpaper moving at supersonic speeds. "Mayday, Mayday," he transmitted through communication arrays that sparked and died even as he spoke. "Colonial Survey Ship Meridian, this is Reconnaissance 7. Emergency landing on Nix 7. Shuttle integrity compromised. Atmospheric interference preventing." The transmission cut out as another surge of electromagnetic fury overloaded his remaining systems. Through the fracturing viewport, Jake caught glimpses of landscape that looked like the inside of a kaleidoscope designed by someone with violent tendencies. Jagged crystal formations that split the storm winds into razor patterns, rocky cliffs that rose like ancient fortresses against the chaos, and what appeared to be structured ruins carved directly into the mountainside. The crash landing felt like being dropped into a blender filled with broken glass and regret. Jake's safety harness did its job, keeping him alive while his shuttle performed an elaborate demonstration of how various materials responded to sudden deceleration against unyielding stone. When the destruction finally stopped, he found himself hanging upside down in what remained of his cockpit, surrounded by the smell of ozone and melted electronics. "Well," he said to the twisted metal around him, testing his voice and finding it surprisingly steady, "that could have gone better." Emergency protocols kicked in with the reliability of well-drilled training. Jake assessed his physical condition. Bruised but mobile, no obvious breaks, cognitive function apparently intact since he was capable of sarcasm in crisis situations. Equipment status was less encouraging. His emergency beacon was dead, communication array destroyed, and life support systems operating on backup power that wouldn't last through the night. Outside his ruined shuttle, the storm continued with the persistence of natural forces that had no patience for human survival needs. Through gaps in the wreckage, Jake could see crystalline particles moving fast enough to cut through exposed skin, driven by winds that made Earth hurricanes look like gentle breezes. "Okay, Morrison," he muttered, beginning the careful process of extracting himself from the wreckage without triggering any of the unstable debris that surrounded him. "Shelter first, then signal for rescue." Simple plan for a not simple situation. The ruins he'd glimpsed during his uncontrolled descent offered the only visible protection from the storm. Jake gathered what remained of his emergency supplies, a portable shelter unit that might provide minimal protection, 3 days of food concentrates, basic medical kit, and a sidearm that would be useless against the weather but provided psychological comfort in an environment where everything seemed designed to kill him. The journey from crash site to ruins covered maybe 200 meters but felt like crossing an active battlefield where the enemy was physics itself. Jake's emergency suit provided some protection against the crystalline wind particles, but he could feel his equipment degrading with each step. By the time he reached the entrance to what appeared to be a carved tunnel leading into the cliffs, his suit's integrity warnings were approaching critical levels. The tunnel entrance was larger than human standard proportions, suggesting it had been built by beings with different physical requirements. The architecture showed smooth curves and organic lines that seemed to flow like water frozen in stone, beautiful in ways that human engineering rarely achieved. Emergency lighting from his suit revealed passages that extended deep into the mountainside, with side chambers and corridors that suggested extensive underground development. "Hello?" Jake called, his voice echoing through passages that seemed to absorb sound in ways that felt almost intentional. "Anyone home? Crashed human in need of shelter and possibly medical attention?" The silence that answered carried weight, as if the ruins were listening and deciding whether he was worth responding to. Jake moved deeper into the complex, following passages that seemed designed for creatures with wings, high ceilings, wide corridors, and air circulation patterns that suggested aerial navigation had been a primary consideration. His portable shelter deployed in what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, its emergency fabric looking pathetically small against carved walls that rose into shadows beyond his suit light's reach. The storm outside continued its assault on the planet's surface, but the ruins provided blessed silence that allowed Jake to hear his own thoughts for the first time since the crash. That's when he realized he wasn't alone. The awareness came gradually, a sense of being observed that had nothing to do with visible threat and everything to do with the primitive human instinct that recognized predator attention. Jake's hand moved automatically to his sidearm while his eyes searched the shadows beyond his emergency lighting. "I know you're there," he said to the darkness, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline spike that accompanied the realization. "I'm not armed with anything that could threaten you, and I'm only here because my shuttle decided to become abstract art in your storm." Movement in the shadows, not threatening, but deliberate. Something large and graceful shifting position with the fluid motion of a creature designed for three-dimensional navigation. Jake caught glimpses of pale skin, the elegant curve of what might have been wings, and eyes that reflected his emergency lighting like red stars in the darkness. "Umbral," he whispered, recognition hitting him like another kind of storm. The figure stepped closer, revealing features that confirmed his identification. She was tall, elegant, with skin that seemed to emit its own faint luminescence and pointed ears that swept upward in graceful curves. But it was her wings that made breathing difficult, massive, bat-like appendages that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating patterns of shadow and depth that suggested they served purposes beyond simple flight. Her eyes were the color of fresh blood, and when they focused on him with unmistakable intelligence, Jake realized that his survival now depended on the goodwill of a species that human records described as extinct vampiric predators who'd once ruled the Outer Rim territories before mysteriously vanishing. "Well," he said to the alien vampire watching him with curiosity rather than hunger, "this is either going to be really interesting or really brief." Outside the ruins, the storm continued to tear apart anything foolish enough to remain exposed, but Jake found himself less worried about the weather and more concerned about explaining to a potentially immortal predator why she should help rather than eliminate the human who'd crashed into her home. The Umbral woman said nothing, but her red eyes held depths that suggested she was evaluating him according to criteria he couldn't begin to understand. Jake settled into his emergency shelter, maintaining eye contact while trying to project non-threatening competence rather than the panic his survival instincts were recommending. In the distance, thunder echoed through the ruins like the voice of a planet that had no patience for anyone unprepared for its challenges, and Jake found himself hoping that ancient vampiric aliens had better weather prediction than his shuttle's navigation systems. The Umbral woman communicated without speaking, her thoughts appearing in Jake's mind with the clarity of someone placing ideas directly into his consciousness like gifts he hadn't known he needed. The sensation was startling but not painful, more like remembering something he'd temporarily forgotten than having foreign concepts forced into his awareness. "I am Lady Ravenna of the House of Whispered Stars," her voice resonated in his thoughts, carrying harmonics that suggested vast age and profound loneliness. "You are human. Your species surveys this world but does not settle. Why? Jake found that responding required concentrating on his thoughts rather than speaking aloud, as if his consciousness had suddenly developed a new form of expression. "The storms make permanent settlement difficult. We're cataloging planets for potential terraforming, but Nick 7's electromagnetic tempests destroy most technology we'd need for colonization. Wise. This world does not welcome those unprepared for its moods." Ravenna moved closer, her wings folding against her body with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to navigating tight spaces. "Your people know of mine." Historical records mention the Umbral, Jake replied carefully, unsure how much information would be welcome. "Advanced species that controlled territory in the Outer Rim several centuries ago. Most humans assumed your people had moved beyond our exploration range or died out." Ravenna finished with what might have been amusement. A reasonable assumption. "Most of my kind departed this region when younger species began viewing us as threats rather than neighbors. Those who remained, chose isolation over conflict." Jake studied her face, noting the way her red eyes seemed to hold depths that suggested experiences spanning far longer than human lifetimes. "And you remained here alone. Someone must guard the archives." Ravenna gestured toward passages that led deeper into the complex. Knowledge accumulated over millennia. Historical records, scientific discoveries, philosophical works from civilizations that existed before your species developed space travel. Too valuable to abandon, too dangerous to leave unprotected, asterisk. Dangerous how? Jake asked, his anthropological curiosity overriding survival caution. Information that challenges established power structures has always been dangerous, asterisk Ravenna replied. Asterisk young species prefer simple narratives about galactic development. Evidence that contradicts their assumptions about superiority and destiny tends to disappear, asterisk. Before Jake could respond, the storm outside intensified with renewed fury, and he felt the temperature in his emergency shelter dropping toward levels that would challenge his human physiology. His suit's environmental systems were struggling with power conservation, and hypothermia was becoming a real concern. Ravenna's enhanced senses apparently detected his distress before he fully registered it himself. Asterisk you are becoming cold. Human thermal regulation requires higher ambient temperatures than umbral physiology, asterisk. My emergency power won't last much longer, Jake admitted, checking his suit's status displays. The shelter provides some insulation, but not enough for extended survival in these conditions. I can help, asterisk Ravenna said, though her mental voice carried undertones Jake couldn't quite interpret. Asterisk umbral energy sharing allows thermal regulation through direct contact. But the process requires trust, asterisk. Trust how? Ravenna moved closer, and Jake caught the subtle scent that seemed to accompany her presence, something like starlight and ozone, alien but not unpleasant. Asterisk my people absorb life energy through physical contact. Not to drain or harm, but to share and strengthen. The process allows me to provide warmth and vitality, but you would experience temporary consciousness merging, asterisk. Jake felt his core temperature continuing to drop despite his emergency suit's best efforts. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, and his power reserves wouldn't sustain life support through the night. What does consciousness merging involve? Shared thoughts, emotions, sensory experiences. You would feel what I feel, understand perspectives shaped by centuries of existence. I would experience human consciousness, your memories, your emotional patterns, your species' unique approach to processing reality, asterisk. The practical part of Jake's mind recognized this as his best survival option. The scientific part was fascinated by the opportunity to experience alien consciousness from the inside. And somewhere deeper, he found himself curious about what centuries of solitude might do to someone's perspective on existence. Will it hurt? He asked. No. The sensation is intimate. Like sharing warmth with someone whose mind operates according to different principles than your own, asterisk. Jake looked at Ravenna's pale face, noting the way her red eyes seemed to hold genuine concern for his well-being despite having no obvious reason to care about a crashed human's survival. What do I need to do? Remove your outer garments. Lie down. Allow me to wrap you in my wings while maintaining physical contact, asterisk. Under other circumstances, Jake might have been concerned about the implications of removing protective gear while in close contact with an alien predator. But hypothermia was already affecting his judgment, and the alternative was freezing to death in a shelter that wouldn't protect him through the storm. He deactivated his emergency suit's outer layers, feeling immediate cold that made his teeth chatter. Ravenna approached with movements that seemed designed to appear non-threatening, her massive wings spreading to reveal the complex membrane structure that apparently served multiple functions beyond simple flight. This is either going to be really interesting, Jake said, lying down on his shelter's thermal mat, or really stupid. Both, perhaps, asterisk Ravenna replied with what he was beginning to recognize as her particular form of humor. When she settled beside him, Jake felt immediate warmth that had nothing to do with simple body heat. Her skin against his carried energy that seemed to flow directly into his cells, reversing the hypothermic process with efficiency that human medicine couldn't match. But more startling was the way her wings folded around them both, creating a cocoon of darkness that felt simultaneously protective and intimate. The consciousness merging began gradually. First as shared awareness of physical sensations, then as overlapping emotional patterns that let him experience her profound loneliness and her surprise at finding genuine concern for his well-being. But deeper than emotion came something else, her perspective on time, space, and existence shaped by centuries of solitary contemplation. Through Ravenna's consciousness, Jake experienced the memory of her people's exodus from this region of space, proud beings choosing exile over warfare, carrying their accumulated knowledge to distant worlds rather than fight species too young to understand the value of what they were destroying. He felt her decision to remain behind as guardian, accepting eternal solitude to preserve information that might someday benefit civilizations mature enough to appreciate its significance. But he also felt something unexpected, her growing fascination with human consciousness, which operated according to principles entirely different from umbral psychology. Where her people thought in terms of vast time scales and accumulated wisdom, humans seemed to approach each moment with immediate curiosity and adaptive flexibility that allowed rapid innovation. Your people are remarkably resilient. Ravenna's thoughts carried overtones of admiration. Most species develop rigid patterns as they mature. Humans seem to maintain capacity for change even as adults. Jake found himself sharing his own perspective, the excitement of exploration and discovery, the satisfaction of solving problems through creative adaptation, the deep human need for connection that made isolation feel like a form of death. Through their merged consciousness, he felt Ravenna's surprise at how intensely humans experienced emotional bonds, and her growing understanding of why his species approached the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. The storm continued outside, but wrapped in Ravenna's wings with their consciousness intertwined, Jake felt safer and warmer than he had since leaving human space. More than that, he felt connected to someone whose loneliness matched his own, and whose vast experience offered perspectives he'd never imagined possible. Sleep, Ravenna suggested as exhaustion from the crash and consciousness merging began affecting his awareness. The storm will pass by morning. Your rescue teams will be able to locate you once the electromagnetic interference clears. Jake drifted toward unconsciousness while still wrapped in alien wings, his last coherent thought being wonder at how trust between species could develop so quickly when survival depended on cooperation rather than competition. Jake woke to silence that felt almost alien after the storm's constant assault on his senses. Ravenna's wings still surrounded him like a living shelter, but her consciousness had withdrawn to give him privacy during sleep, leaving only the warmth of her presence and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Outside, Nick 7's electromagnetic tempest had moved on, leaving behind the kind of crystalline clarity that made the planet's beauty visible instead of deadly. The storm has passed, Ravenna said, her mental voice carrying undertones of something that might have been reluctance. Your rescue teams will be able to navigate safely now. Jake shifted carefully, not wanting to disturb their shared warmth while his mind processed the night's events. The consciousness merging had left him with residual awareness of Ravenna's thoughts, not invasive, but like echoes of a profound conversation that continued in the background of his awareness. How long do I have before they locate the crash site? He asked. Several hours. Your emergency beacon activated automatically when the electromagnetic interference cleared. But search patterns will require time to cover this region systematically. Jake found himself oddly disappointed by the prospect of rescue, which suggested that sharing consciousness with an ancient alien vampire had affected his priorities in ways he hadn't anticipated. Ravenna, would you show me the archives you mentioned? The knowledge your people preserved? Her red eyes brightened with something that looked like pleased surprise. You wish to see our libraries? I'm a communications specialist, but I trained as a xenoarchaeologist before joining the Survey Corps, Jake explained. The opportunity to study pre-human galactic civilization records might not come again. Ravenna's wings folded back as she rose with fluid grace, gesturing toward passages that led deeper into the mountain complex. Few beings outside my people have seen the archive of whispered stars. Your scientific curiosity honors the knowledge we preserved. They moved through corridors that revealed increasing sophistication as they progressed, walls that seemed to be grown rather than carved, lighting that responded to their presence without visible power sources, and air circulation that created gentle currents suggesting the complex extended far deeper than Jake had imagined. How large is this place? Jake asked, marveling at architecture that seemed to flow like frozen music. The archives extend through 17 levels, Ravenna replied. Living quarters, research laboratories, cultural preservation chambers, and the great library that contains our most significant collections. My people spent centuries building this repository before the Exodus. They emerged into a vast chamber that made Jake's breath catch with wonder. The great library rose in spiraling tiers that seemed to defy normal architectural principles, with crystalline storage matrices that pulsed with soft light and holographic displays that showed information in formats his human senses could barely process. The scale suggested knowledge accumulation spanning millennia, organized according to principles that human archival science hadn't yet developed. This is incredible, Jake said, moving between display consoles that showed everything from stellar cartography to biological classification systems for species he'd never heard of. How much information is stored here? The accumulated knowledge of 47 civilizations that achieved spaceflight before your species developed agriculture, Ravenna said, her pride in the collection evident despite her attempt at matter-of-fact delivery. Scientific discoveries, philosophical works, historical records, artistic expressions. Everything we could preserve before those civilizations either transcended physical existence or destroyed themselves through warfare. Jake paused at a display showing what appeared to be genetic analysis of hybrid species development across multiple star systems. Is this research on interspecies reproduction? Among other biological studies, Ravenna confirmed, moving to stand beside him. The universe tends toward diversity rather than isolation. Most advanced species eventually develop the ability to share genetic material with compatible life forms, creating hybrid offspring that combine advantages from multiple evolutionary lines. Has your species developed that capability? Ravenna's expression shifted in ways Jake was learning to recognize as complex emotional processing. Umbral physiology allows energy sharing that can result in genetic adaptation. But the process requires extended contact and mutual consent from both consciousness patterns involved. Something in her mental voice suggested personal significance beyond academic discussion, and Jake found himself remembering the intensity of their consciousness merging the night before. Extended contact like what we experienced. Similar, but deeper. Prolonged energy sharing can modify genetic expression in ways that allow reproductive compatibility between species that should theoretically be unable to produce offspring together. Jake studied her face, noting the way her red eyes seemed to hold depths of possibility she wasn't quite ready to explore directly. Have you ever experienced that level of connection with another species? No, Ravenna said quietly. Until last night, I had never shared consciousness with a human. Your people's mental patterns are, surprisingly compatible with umbral psychology. They continued exploring the archives, with Ravenna showing him collections that spanned everything from artistic works that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception to scientific research that could revolutionize human understanding of physics and biology. But Jake found his attention increasingly drawn to Ravenna herself, the way she moved through the knowledge she'd preserved with obvious love and pride, her enthusiasm for sharing discoveries with someone who could appreciate their significance, and the growing warmth in her mental communications that suggested she was enjoying his company as much as he was enjoying hers. Ravenna, Jake said as they paused in what appeared to be a cultural preservation chamber filled with music that somehow incorporated electromagnetic frequencies as melody, how long have you been here alone? 143 years since the last of my people departed, she replied. Though I have maintained telepathic contact with some who traveled to distant systems. The connection weakens over interstellar distances, but it provides companionship of sorts. That's a long time to spend in isolation, even for someone with your lifespan. Duty requires sacrifice, Ravenna said, though Jake caught undertones of loneliness that her formal words couldn't quite hide. The archives are too valuable to abandon, and too vulnerable to leave unguarded. But you're not just a guardian, Jake said, recognizing something in her responses that resonated with his own motivations for joining the Survey Corps. You love this place. The knowledge, the responsibility, the connection to your people's legacy. Ravenna's surprise at his understanding came through their residual consciousness link with enough intensity to make him feel her emotional reaction directly. Yes. This work gives meaning to existence that would otherwise feel empty. Jake found himself moving closer, drawn by the combination of her profound knowledge and the vulnerability she tried to hide beneath formal duty. It doesn't have to be empty. The work is important, but isolation isn't required for preservation. What do you mean? I mean that knowledge gains value when it's shared with people who can benefit from it, Jake said, his training in xenoarchaeology combining with growing personal feelings to suggest possibilities he'd never considered before. Your archives could revolutionize human understanding of galactic development. My people would treasure the opportunity to learn from what you've preserved. And in exchange? Ravenna asked, though her mental voice carried hope she was trying to control. In exchange, you wouldn't have to guard this place alone anymore. Partnership instead of isolation. Collaboration instead of solitary duty. Ravenna's red eyes met his with intensity that made the air around them seem to shimmer with possibility. Jake, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe some kinds of preservation work better when they're shared between people who understand their value, Jake said, reaching out to touch her hand and feeling the same energy flow that had saved his life during the storm. And maybe some kinds of loneliness can be healed through connection with someone whose mind operates differently but compatibly. The silence that followed carried weight as Ravenna processed implications that clearly extended far beyond simple partnership arrangements. Through their residual consciousness link, Jake felt her considering possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine, and his own growing certainty that the crash on Nix 7 might have been the beginning of something more significant than simple survival. Outside, the search and rescue teams were undoubtedly following his emergency beacon toward the crash site, but Jake found himself hoping that rescue wouldn't mean the end of the most remarkable relationship he'd ever experienced. The rescue shuttle's arrival was announced by communication signals that cut through Nix 7's post-storm atmosphere with the efficiency of human technology designed for emergency operations. Jake watched the approaching vessel through the archive's observation chambers while feeling his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't quite untangle, relief at rescue combined with reluctance to leave a place that had become unexpectedly significant in less than 24 hours. That's my team, Jake said, recognizing the Meridian's shuttle configuration. Dr. Sarah Chen is probably piloting. She's good at navigating tricky atmospheric conditions. Ravenna stood beside him, her massive wings folded against her body as she observed the approaching humans with interest rather than concern. Will you tell them about me? About the archives? That depends on what you want, Jake replied, studying her face for clues about her preferences. I could report the crash and recovery without mentioning my contact with Umbral survivors. Or I could introduce you to my team and let you decide how much information you want to share. Through their residual consciousness link, Jake felt Ravenna's complex emotional processing, curiosity about humans combined with caution born from centuries of species conflict, desire for connection warring with protective instincts for the knowledge she guarded. You're Dr. Chen, Ravenna said carefully, what is her scientific specialty? Xenoarchaeology and cultural preservation, Jake replied. She's the reason our survey missions focus on understanding rather than simply cataloging. Sarah believes that knowledge gains value through respectful study rather than exploitation. Respectful study, Ravenna repeated, testing the concept. Most species we encountered viewed our archives as resources to be claimed rather than treasures to be honored. Sarah's different. She spent her early career documenting civilizations that had been destroyed by resource extraction. Her approach emphasizes preservation and protection over immediate utilization. Ravenna nodded slowly, her red eyes reflecting decision-making processes that drew on far more experience than any human could claim. I would like to meet your Dr. Chen. If she demonstrates the scientific ethics you describe, perhaps it is time for the archives to serve their intended purpose. Which is advancing galactic civilization through shared knowledge rather than hoarded secrets, Ravenna said. My people preserve this information for species mature enough to use it wisely. Perhaps your humans have reached that level of development. They made their way to the archive's entrance, where Jake activated his emergency beacon to guide the rescue team to their location. The process gave him time to consider how to introduce the concept of ancient alien vampires to colleagues who'd expected to find him sheltering in natural caves rather than exploring repositories of pre-human galactic knowledge. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the rescue shuttle wearing the expression of someone who'd spent hours worrying about a missing team member, relief evident in her quick movement toward Jake's position. She was followed by Lieutenant Torres, the team's medical specialist, and Engineer Park, whose job involved analyzing any technology they encountered during survey operations. "Jake!" Sarah called, reaching him with the efficient stride of someone accustomed to emergency recoveries. "Are you injured? The crash site looked like your shuttle went through a commercial shredder." "I'm fine," Jake replied, gesturing toward the archive entrance. "Better than fine, actually. Sarah, I need to introduce you to someone who's been helping me survive." "Dar." "Sarah Chen, this is Lady Ravenna of the House of Whispered Stars. She's umbral." The silence that followed carried enough weight to affect local gravity as three humans processed the implications of encountering a species they'd assumed was extinct. Sarah's xenoarchaeological training kicked in first, her scientific curiosity overriding the surprise that had frozen her colleagues. "Umbral," Sarah repeated, studying Ravenna with the intense attention she usually reserved for significant archaeological discoveries. "Lady Ravenna, it's an honor to meet you. Human records suggested your people had moved beyond our exploration range." "Most did," Ravenna replied, apparently deciding to communicate verbally rather than telepathically for the humans' comfort. "I remain to guard archives that contain knowledge from civilizations that existed before your species achieved spaceflight." Lieutenant Torres found his voice next, though his training in military medicine was clearly struggling to process alien vampires who spoke perfect English. "Archives? What kind of archives?" "Scientific research, historical records, philosophical works, artistic expressions," Ravenna said. 47 civilizations worth of accumulated knowledge, preserved for species mature enough to benefit from study rather than exploitation. Engineer Park stepped forward with the expression of someone who'd recognized the potential significance of what they were discussing. "Ma'am, are you talking about a functioning repository of pre-human galactic technology and cultural information?" "Among other things," Ravenna confirmed. "Jake has expressed interest in establishing formal study arrangements that would allow human researchers access to the collections while ensuring appropriate preservation protocols." Sarah's eyes widened as the implications hit her scientific worldview like a controlled detonation. "Lady Ravenna, with respect, what you're describing could revolutionize human understanding of galactic development. The research opportunities alone would require permanent human presence on Nix 7, Ravenna said, her red eyes finding Jake's with meaning that made his pulse quicken. "The archives cannot be relocated, and their complexity requires extended study rather than simple data transfer." Jake caught the subtext in her words and felt his heart perform maneuvers that had nothing to do with cardiovascular function. "Sarah, I've been thinking about requesting extended assignment here. The survey data alone would justify establishing a research station, and Lady Ravenna's archives represent the kind of discovery that happens once in a career." "Extended assignment," Sarah repeated, studying Jake's face with the analytical attention that made her excellent at reading between the lines of official reports. "Jake, are you talking about permanent posting to an isolated planet with electromagnetic storms that destroy most of our technology?" "I'm talking about the opportunity to serve as cultural liaison for the most significant archaeological discovery in human history," Jake replied. "Plus, the storms are predictable once you understand the patterns. And the company is exceptional." Sarah looked between Jake and Ravenna, her xenoarchaeological training helping her recognize the signs of deep personal connection that had developed alongside professional collaboration. "I see. And Lady Ravenna, you would be comfortable with permanent human presence in your archives?" "With the right humans," Ravenna said, her gaze returning to Jake with warmth that made the air around them shimmer slightly. "Those who understand that knowledge is meant to be shared respectfully rather than exploited carelessly." Lieutenant Torres cleared his throat diplomatically. Ma'am, I hate to interrupt what sounds like an incredible discovery, but we should probably get Jake back to the Meridian for medical evaluation. Standard protocol after crash landings. Actually, Jake said, feeling changes in his physiology that he was only beginning to understand, I think you'll find my medical readings are better than they should be after a crash like that. Extended contact with umbral energy sharing has some interesting side effects. Torres ran his portable medical scanner over Jake, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline as he read the results. Jake, your cellular regeneration rates are about 3 times normal human parameters. Your immune system shows enhancement patterns I've never seen. What kind of energy sharing are we talking about? The kind that creates permanent physiological bonds between compatible species, Ravenna said quietly. Jake's human biology has adapted to incorporate umbral healing capabilities. The process is irreversible. The weight of that admission settled over the group like atmospheric pressure change. Sarah's scientific mind immediately grasped the implications while Torres began running additional scans to understand the medical ramifications. Irreversible how? Sarah asked with the careful tone of someone who suspected the answer would be personally significant for her team member. Jake's consciousness has integrated with mine in ways that make extended separation inadvisable, Ravenna explained. The energy sharing that kept him alive during the storm created permanent neurological links. He can survive in human space, but extended isolation from umbral presence would cause psychological deterioration similar to sensory deprivation. And for you? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer through their consciousness link. The same. Your human thought patterns have become integrated with my awareness in ways that make solitude feel like incomplete existence. Engineer Park looked up from readings he'd been taking of the archive's entrance. Dr. Chen, the technology readings here are off the charts. We're looking at power systems that operate on principles our science hasn't discovered yet, information storage that makes our best computers look like stone tablets, and architectural engineering that shouldn't be possible according to known physics. Sarah nodded slowly, her scientific excitement warring with concern for Jake's well-being and the practical challenges of establishing research operations on a planet hostile to most human technology. Lady Ravenna, would you be willing to accept a permanent research station here? Human scientists working alongside you to study the archives while learning from your people's preservation methods. Under appropriate protocols, Ravenna agreed. Researchers who understand that some knowledge requires wisdom to apply safely, and that cultural artifacts deserve respect rather than simple analysis. I could coordinate the research program, Jake said, feeling certainty that had nothing to do with career advancement and everything to do with the woman whose consciousness had become intertwined with his own. Serve as cultural liaison and ensure that human scientific enthusiasm doesn't override appropriate preservation ethics. Sarah studied Jake's face, noting the way his expression carried depth that hadn't been there before the crash. Jake, are you sure about this? Permanent assignment to Nix 7 means giving up everything you built in human space. Career advancement, family connections, the possibility of relationships with your own species. I'm not giving up relationships, Jake replied, reaching for Ravenna's hand and feeling the energy flow that had become as essential to his well-being as breathing. I'm choosing the most important relationship I've ever had, along with work that could benefit both our species for generations. Ravenna's fingers intertwined with his, her red eyes reflecting emotions that spanned the spectrum from joy to wonder to protective determination. Jake, you understand that partnership with me means accepting changes that will continue throughout your extended lifespan? The consciousness bond doesn't just connect us, it grants longevity that will allow you to experience centuries of existence. Extended lifespan, Torres repeated, his medical scanner beeping frantically as it detected physiological changes in Jake's cellular structure. How extended are we talking about? Umbral energy sharing typically grants human partners lifespans measured in centuries rather than decades, Ravenna explained. Long enough to truly appreciate the depth of knowledge contained in the archives, and to develop research relationships that span generations of human scholars. Jake felt the truth of her words through their consciousness link, understanding that his choice involved not just love and professional opportunity, but fundamental transformation into something more than purely human. The prospect should have been terrifying, but instead felt like the completion of something that had been missing from his existence without his conscious awareness. "Sarah," he said, meeting his colleague's concerned gaze directly, "request authorization for permanent research station establishment on Nix 7. Joint Human-Umbral Cultural Preservation Project with potential for revolutionary advances in xenoarchaeology, biotechnology, and interspecies cooperation. And if Command asks about your personal motivations for requesting permanent assignment?" Jake looked at Ravenna, whose ancient wisdom combined with growing love for him in ways that made the future feel full of infinite possibility. "Tell them I found something worth protecting that's also worth sharing. The archives represent knowledge that could benefit all galactic civilization, but only if approached with the respect and patience that require permanent dedication. Plus," he added with a smile that encompassed both professional enthusiasm and personal joy, "the company is extraordinary, the work is meaningful, and I've never been happier in my life." 6 months later, Research Station Whispered Stars hummed with activity as xenoarchaeologists, linguists, and cultural preservation specialists from across human space worked alongside Ravenna to unlock secrets that predated human civilization by millennia. Jake served as station coordinator and cultural liaison, his enhanced abilities allowing him to bridge the gap between human scientific enthusiasm and umbral preservation wisdom. The storm seasons had become opportunities for extended research sessions in the deepest archive levels, with Jake and Ravenna's shared consciousness allowing rapid translation of concepts that would have taken years to decode through conventional methods. Their partnership had evolved into something that honored both species' strengths while creating new possibilities for collaboration that neither had imagined possible. "Another research team arrives next week," Jake said, reviewing station reports while Ravenna organized newly discovered texts that contained what appeared to be instruction manuals for faster-than-light travel methods human science had never conceived. "Good," Ravenna replied, her red eyes bright with satisfaction at seeing her preserved knowledge finally serving its intended purpose. "The archives were always meant to be studied by multiple perspectives. Your people's fresh approaches reveal connections my solitary study had missed." Outside the research station, Nix 7's moons cast silver light over landscape that now supported not just ruins and storms, but thriving collaboration between species whose partnership had transformed isolation into shared purpose. Jake watched human researchers working alongside the woman whose wings had once shielded him from a storm, marveling at how love and duty could combine to create something more valuable than either could achieve alone. "Ready for the evening archives tour?" Ravenna asked, her consciousness already reaching out to connect with his in the daily ritual that had become as essential as breathing. "Always," Jake replied, taking her hand and feeling the energy flow that had saved his life, transformed his existence, and opened possibilities for understanding that spanned the breadth of galactic civilization. Together, they descended into chambers filled with the accumulated wisdom of ages, their shared consciousness bridging species barriers while their love illuminated knowledge that would benefit countless generations yet to come.